that's, people were like, oh, you're an advocate. Well, sure, okay. These are not things that I just looked into doing. It was just a part of who I was at that point, you know? So that's basically, I had a friend say, you need a nonprofit. And I'm like, no, I don't, because I didn't understand the ins and outs of a nonprofit. So I'm thinking that, okay, I'll start the nonprofit. It's not something that I'm really trying to make money doing. I just want to be able to help people, yada, yada, yada. And that's basically how it started. It's Gibson Lupus ARC Autoimmune Resource Center. And I'm very excited. I'm very happy that I was able to start that as a coach, as a life coach, actually. I didn't understand that that was my title, but yes, I started it as a life coach, an advocate.
Zuriel, welcome to Grow Healthy, Help People, the podcast that Accordis, our company, puts out, talking with nonprofit leaders around the country, hearing the stories of victory, success, challenge, overcoming obstacles, and that sort of thing. I'm glad you're on the podcast today. So you're calling in from Houston, Texas today, is that right?
Absolutely correct. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Are you born and raised Houston?
I was actually born in Louisiana, but I was raised in Houston.
Houston's a good place. I've heard people that live there absolutely love it. So we're going to talk about Gibson Lupus Autoimmune Disease Resource Center. It's kind of a mouthful, but the story here is not just a story of a nonprofit that you started for others. This is a bit of your story. So tell us a little bit of that story. Tell us what you studied going to school, what you thought you were going to do professionally long term, and then how you came to start this organization.
Um, so I got sick like in high school. I was diagnosed with lupus in '97, and I was going through a major roller coaster in my life. I was living with my dad in California, while my mother was here in Texas, and I all of a sudden couldn't breathe real good. It was heavy on me. And I called my mom, who was in Texas, and I told her, my symptoms, what was going on. She was in LVN at that time. So she told me hang up and call 911, which I did. I was in and out of consciousness and I had to actually leave the door open for the EMT to actually get me out the house. So I was in and out of consciousness. I remember seeing mountains on the way to the hospital. Of course, California is gorgeous. Um, the next time I went to sleep, and then the next time I woke up in the hospital bed with my mother pacing back and forth. Mind you, I said I was in California. My mother was in Texas, so I was out for quite some time. My journey started with, you go to a hospital, you get an IV. I had several because my veins kept popping, one after the other. And then there was one moment I woke up and I heard the doctors telling my mom that she's not going to make it. Her body is literally shutting down on you, on her. And I kind of fell asleep after that. My mom tells me, she said she told them to test me for lupus. And unfortunately, they did not want to do that because they was like, she's not showing symptoms of that. She shouldn't have to go through all of this, that, and the other, which isn't a whole lot doing the testing. But because my mother was adamant about it, they tested me and everything came back positive. So once I got that positive test, they gave me the correct medication and I started coming to where I didn't die. They thought I was going to die then, but I did not die. I was still here, so that was a roller
Hmm.
coaster within itself. My mother brought me back to
And that
Texas,
was when you were 16 or 17 years old?
about 17, 18 years old. Yeah, right after high
Yeah.
school.
Wow.
Yeah, I graduated and went to California to stay with
Yeah.
my dad, and it just exploded. Um, so my mother brought me back to Texas to actually stay with my grandmother, and no one understood what I was going through because all I could really do was sleep. I got up, I ate, I took medication, I, went to the restroom, but I slept majority of the time because my body was just so overwhelmed, and then all the medications that I was on as well. As the years kept going on, I was in and out of the hospital, because I really didn't understand what I was going through. And, we're taught go to the doctor, go to the doctor. They'll trust the doctor. They're supposed to know what they're talking about, just listen. And that's what I did. And I ended up on a page and a half of medication. And I was like, this is a lot going on. There was a time where I had one doctor where she put me on a medication and I literally blew up like a Oompa Loompa, like this little round thing. And it was so funny to my family. I had one cousin who was like, if I put a pin in you, are you going to blow away like a balloon? And of course, my feelings were hurt at the time, but I mean, that's exactly how I looked. And my mother came to visit and she was like, have you asked him about a water pill? I was like, what is a water pill? And so I go to the doctor and I tell her, I said, ma'am, I've been fat before. I've never been this. So I don't know what my body's doing. And, I was told to ask about a water pill. She says, don't worry about it. You're just fat. I said, no, you didn't hear me. I've been fat before. This is not it. So she wasn't listening. So I decided to take things into my own hands. I started to wean myself off the medication and I totally stopped that medication that she had given me. And the next time, of course, I lost all the weight. And the next time I saw her, about 3, 6 months later, she was like, oh my God, you look great. What did you do? I said, stop taking your medication. And she looked at me like a deer in headlights. And unfortunately, she put on my paperwork that I was non-compliant because I stopped taking the medication that she gave me to take. But she wasn't listening to me about the side effects, and I really felt like a guinea pig. I could have died listening to her, or something. I don't know. All I know is she wasn't listening about my side effects. So with that on my record, going further, still in and out of the hospital. I could have dropped at any time. My sister used to make jokes about being on vacation, and all the hospitals knew me because I had my own little private suite because I could drop at any time, no matter what I was doing. Um, and I was like, okay, so going back and forth, I'm going to these doctor's appointments on my own because, like, I'm fresh out of high school, supposed to be an adult now, right? Going to these doctor's appointment. I go to another doctor where he's reading results from a test, or, a blood test or whatever. And he looks at me and he says, you're going to die at 24. You're not going to have kids and you'll die at 24. Mind you, I'm like, just got out of my teens in my early 20s. I was like, wait, do you realize what you're saying to me? Because he was so nonchalant with them saying it. It was just like nothing. And he was like, yeah, I realize exactly what I'm saying with you. You need to go home and deal with that. And I didn't tell anybody because who do you go home and tell, hey, I'm gonna die, you know? And that really stuck with me. And I dealt with that. And I don't suggest that for anybody, but I dealt with that on my own. With the thinking that I was gonna die at 24 because that's what the doctor said. I was like, well, I don't have any real attachments. I don't not dating anybody. I don't have kids. I don't have any collateral. I mean, if I die, I die. But I was doing any and everything I thought I was big and bad enough to do at that time because I felt like my life is about to be over anyway. And when my 21st birthday hit, my dad called me to say happy birthday, and I was just rolling over in my bed, like, great, thank you, because I was tired. I had already partied, I've done everything. By the time I turned 21, it was kind of like, okay, here we are. Um, so I got tired of being sick all the time, so I started to do things differently, and I'm started moving a little differently, because the pain was just overbearing from medication to drinking while on medication, which I don't recommend for anybody. But, when you're depressed and you're trying to numb things, you go through a lot of stuff, like, God, why me? And what is this going on? And I just started to do things differently. I was going to church, I was praying, I was, started to eat a little differently, eat what I could afford, but still eat differently. And things, eased
Mm-hmm.
up on me a little bit. So when my 24th birthday hit, I was like, oh, I'm still here. And I'm like looking around the room and like, well, maybe he was off a little bit, just a little bit. So I actually sat in that for a year waiting to die, literally waiting to die, going day by day, waiting to, you
How many
know,
years ago was this?
how many years ago with this? I'm 48 now. So it was
Oh
it was
wow.
it's been a
Yeah.
while. It's been a while. So, it at the
Yeah.
end of the day, it's like
It's been
who's a,
it's been 20, yeah. That's
yeah,
incredible.
20
24
plus
years
years.
since then. They said
20
you're
20
now
plus
you're
years.
24. It's been 24 years since then.
Yes, 24 years. And I'm grateful. I am so grateful because, I've been through depression. I've been through, the sacrificial stuff. I want that point, I wanted to. You know what I mean? Because I didn't get the help from the doctors. My family, of course, didn't understand, and I felt alone. I tried the support groups, and, they were so woe is me that I was like, I could commit suicide at home. I don't need y'all help for that. And it really felt that depressing. So
Hmm.
that's basically where my journey
So
started. I
what
know you weren't
prompted the
expecting that
start of
full story,
yeah,
but
that's great. I love it. What prompted you starting the nonprofit?
what what prompted me to start it? Um, I started helping things. I told them certain things that, hey, have you tried this to ease your pain? Hey, have you tried that to ease your pain? I would let somebody know about my story and be like, hey, you don't know how long you have on this earth. You don't have to believe just what one person says. Try something else different in your life. Just things like that. And I continuously did it so much that, people were like, oh, you're an advocate. Well, sure, okay. These are not things that I just looked into doing. It was just a part of who I was at that point, you know? So that's basically, I had a friend say, you need a nonprofit. And I'm like, no, I don't, because I didn't understand the ins and outs of a nonprofit. So I'm thinking that, okay, I'll start the nonprofit. It's not something that I'm really trying to make money doing. I just want to be able to help people, yada, yada, yada. And that's basically how it started. It's Gibson Lupus ARC Autoimmune Resource Center. And I'm very excited. I'm very happy that I was able to start that as a coach, as a life coach, actually. I didn't understand that that was my title, but yes, I started it as a life coach, an advocate.
Helping people helping people with lupus navigate their diagnosis and their life to successful many years of successful life post diagnosis. Is lupus considered a terminal diagnosis? I mean, obviously you've proven that to be wrong.
A lot of us have actually. So at one point they said lupus is non-curable. No, nobody out there can be cured from lupus. But the AA test that was positive in the beginning of my story is no longer there now in my story. So, I mean, you could take that how you want. A lot of people be like, "Oh, well, you're just in recovery." Well, the test keeps coming out the same that it says there's no longer there. I had a positive and now I got a negative. So, and plus now they're coming out with research that they've done saying that they're able to cure lupus. But the research is small, so they're still doing moves towards that. But there are things for recovery as well.
Yeah. So what is a message for people that watch this podcast that may know someone with a lupus diagnosis? What is the message that you have for those people?
For the ones that know someone, don't pity them. Yes, we need understanding. Yes, we need advocacy. Sometimes we even need someone to speak for us sometimes, but do not pity. We don't need someone who's going to make us feel less than we already feel, especially as an adult. You get to a certain point in life, and life is going the way everything you think you need it to go. And then all of a sudden, you have to change everything about yourself, excuse me, inside and out.
Hmm.
So it's do not pity them. Still treat them how
Okay.
you would want to be treated in the situation, with understanding, with love, with patience.
Okay. So, what are the next steps for the Gibson Lupus Autoimmune Disease Resource Center? What are the next steps? What do you think the next 5 years look like?
Um, Building the resource center. I want to be able to promote other organizations because there's so many different organizations and resources out there. Not one person has to take on everything.
Yeah.
You know, So being able to collab with all of these different organizations outside of lupus as well, because lupus is an open door for just about anything. Because a lot of you, it's very rare that you meet someone with lupus who hasn't been diagnosed with something else. So right now, we actually are hosting a health and wellness event that we're doing every other month. We have one coming up June 27th, where we're
Okay.
promoting all of these different organizations that are around willing to help somebody out in the space that they're in. So and then we're talking about full life, not just in the medical side, but having a trust. If something happens to you, what happens to your loved one? Things like that. So just looking at the full scale on everything. So with that, we're doing it that
Mm.
way. And then we have some other projects that, are going to follow beyond that. But that's the one we're starting with.
I like what you're doing. You had a need, saw a need, met your own need, started an organization to meet help other people meet their needs, and now bringing resources together for them. Thank you for starting your nonprofit and doing what you're doing. Thanks for the conversation today. If someone wants to get involved in the organization, what is the best way for them to get involved in the resource center?
The best email address we have right now is gibsonlupusarc@gmail.com, or you can contact us at 832-899-2062. Look us up on the website, gibsonlupusarc.org. Gibson Lupus ARC on all social media platforms. We're here to help and to guide in this best way possible. Also, I forgot to mention, we are connected with a company that's creating a directory for those with lupus and other immune disorders, chronic illnesses, and other ailments. So be a part of the directory. It allows us to promote you on a better platform.
That's great. Zuriel, thank you for your time today. Thanks for being in the podcast and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.